Boa tarde, eu sei que já estamos com pouco tempo, eu vou fazer o mais brevemente possível. A minha intervenção está em inglês e, portanto, eu vou mantê-la em inglês, porque realmente era assim que a tinha feito. E muito rapidamente, então, my intervention will not be so much of a summary about what was said, because I think that everything that was said was very clear. I will mostly tell you about my own questions as a criminal law investigator and how does theory of mind speaks with criminal law, and what are the most important questions about it when it comes to punishing and sentencing. Well, when we know that traditional views on guilt and criminal responsibility tell us that if you're an average adult, 16 or more, if you had an average socialization, and if you're not suffering from extreme pathology, even if you may have some serious personality disorders, then you're guilty. And you are not guilty only if you have an extreme pathology or a psychotic disorder. This is the rule. What the theory of mind may tell us is that maybe there is not a concept of an average adult. Maybe we need to give up this idea that we can idealize an adult as an example of a person that usually is faithful to the law, but sometimes commits crimes. And maybe there is no such thing as an average socialization, and maybe we need to consider each individual as a special case. Also, this means that more attention must be given to childhood trauma and early years of development of the defendant. And even if he's not suffering from an extreme pathology, if he has serious personality disorders, then maybe, just maybe, he's not guilty. Now, other points of this theory of mind considerations lead me to ask this question: is there a never-ending cycle of detachment? Metacognitive capacities are they're congenital. They're acquired within birth and in the first years of life. They may be influenced by genetic background of the parents towards the child. They are definitely influenced by reflected self-function of the parents and their availability to mirroring and create secure attachment. And they are definitely influenced by exposure to trauma in the child herself in her early childhood years. We also know, and we have several information about, that social exclusion and poverty are a very fertile ground for maltreatment, severe emotional neglect, and childhood trauma. And we know that childhood trauma and severe neglect are less likely to create secure attachment. Therefore, secure attachment, and so on, secure attachment leads most likely to poor mentalization, which leads most likely to personality disorders, and personality disorders make it less likely for you to create healthy emotional and social relations. When you have extreme difficulty in creating healthy emotional and social relations, you are more likely to engage in criminal behavior. And then you are also more likely to get yourself in a context of social exclusion and poverty. So is there a cycle of detachment, and is therefore a cycle of criminal behavior? We need, to make this really quick summary, we know that mirror attachment and mentalization are gateways to empathy and aggression prevention. We know that aggression was, and still is in some cases, but it was for millennia, material to survival. We also know that mentalization became material to collaboration as societies became more and more complex in a communal sense. So mentalization is how we regulate our fight and flight disposition. So also aggressive acts are only possible if mentalization is temporarily inhibited or decoupled. So the question, and of course mirroring is, everything was already said about this, how in both Professor Tiago and Professor Fonegui, so I really won't waste much more time with this. Knowing all of these, and you've heard yesterday about Libet's experiment and how conscious thought does not precede our actions. So the question is, is there an alternative to determinism? And what you didn't hear yesterday were the critics to Libet's experiment. And Libet's experiment is exposed to several criticisms. For instance, Libet's experiment is short-sighted. We need to look beyond the seconds before acting to find self-determination, because in our lives, we're not talking about pushing buttons. Libet's experiment may be moot in the sense that the subjects of the experiment already knew that they were going to have to push a button at some point of their will. They knew that beforehand, the experiment itself. So all they had to decide is when. When. I know I'm going to push the button at some point, maybe several times. All I have to decide is when. So there's a distinct possibility that this decision was already made in the beginning of the experiment. So there was not an effective decision to be made every time that person pushed the button. So in life, when we're committing crimes, or we're getting married, having children, even doing important things in our life, it's not about pushing buttons in a preordained decision. So some authors on criminal law say that precisely when we are trying to consider guilt, we cannot look just to the seconds before the criminal act. We must look at the life of the complex process of creating our own personalities, and that's where the guilt concept comes from. It's sort of the construction of our personality and the sum of our life's decisions that lead us to that point where we guiltily commit a criminal crime. But what if really we have not that degree of freedom in constructing our personality because of poor mentalization and the lack of secure attachment? Another of the points of the theory of mind is that it creates an extreme focus on the cause-effect relations between the mother, which is seen as the primary caregiver, although the father can also play that role, but given that usually the mother is the primary caregiver, and our own, the development of mentalization. So the question is this: are we really free from our parents' sins? And I do believe so, because we can see this relation, and it's sometimes referred by some authors, and Professor Fonagy also refers this, that we change from a very communal ways of raising children to a very nuclear family, where we have one person, two people, three people maybe. So it might seem that personality disorders would be a failure of the individual, not of the individual, but of the relationship that is very strict. However, there are alternative ways of creating mentalization and secure attachments. We have extended family, we have school, we have reading, and there's some recent studies on the Harry Potter books that show us that children that were exposed to Harry Potter books became more compassionate and were able to generate empathy towards minorities such as immigrants or homosexuals. And there's also playing. Make-believe and playing, even if alone, is an alternative way to create mentalization. So, we come from, and I will just go to the end of it, we come from this idea that either guilt is a form of wishful thinking, because we need the concept of guilt, we need criminal punishment, we maybe know that people are not exactly completely free, but guiltiness is a desirable goal. We want to prevent aggression, we need the concept of guilt to get to there, so we will establish that there is freedom, there is guiltiness, so we can reach that goal. So in a way, guiltiness becomes a statement of humanity's desire to overcome aggression and criminal behaviors, symbolic conception of guilt. It could be seen as a communicative action in the sense that we believe that because we call ourselves free and we have a concept of guiltiness, then we will, that will be a factor in the process of decision-making towards criminal behavior. But in sum, if we keep persisting to say that people who have insecure attachment, poor mentalization, and serious personality disorders are completely guilt, we may be denying our own chances of freedom, of making free decisions. So what I think is that, and coming back, that we should accept, and maybe this leads us to accept, that there's a shared responsibility in criminal behavior, and this should lead to humble sentencing. And humble sentencing is this, and I will go over the non-criminal solutions. Non-criminal solutions, which are, and of course these elements will be given to you, have been being referred by, we have a World Health Organization summary of 2006 that has a lot of these considerations, but in criminal terms, early solutions should pass from early intervention, because we know that there's a progression in aggression. An adult doesn't start with violent crime usually. The criminal behavior will begin when he's much younger with lesser offenses. So maybe the early intervention where we take this person, this child or adolescent that starts criminal behavior, and we see it as someone that needs early intervention, not in a punishment sense, but in a constructive sense. Also, even if we're talking about adults, we should know that something has failed, not just an individual, to lead to that point in most criminal behavior. So sentencing in criminal sentencing shouldn't be seen strictly as punishment. It should also be seen as constructive intervention if it's willing, and it cannot be forced. And this means that we need a profound reform of our criminal system, in a prison system. And also, of course, in this PowerPoint we didn't get, but Professor Fonagy also sometimes talks about the importance of restorative justice and the necessity and the good results and outcomes that we have from confronting, in some special cases, the defendant with the victims and restoring the channel, the gateway to empathy. It's after the crime, and it doesn't prevent that specific case, but at least we have something when it comes to mentalization of what happened and maybe prevention towards the future. And well, I had to be very, very brief, so now I'll give the floor to my colleague.